Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet? Subscribe now. We've got new stories every day. Now, let's get into it. My dad gave me some solid advice when I first started dating. He said, men of value don't accept disrespect, manipulation, or lies from women. Stay true to yourself and always be a man of value. It's something I've tried to live by ever since. So there I was, talking to my wife, Abigail. There's been a change of plans, I said. The merger meeting got pooved up and I have to leave tomorrow morning. I won't be back until late Sunday. I know how important this wedding is, especially since you're the maid of honor, but I just got promoted to CFO. Missing this meeting isn't an option for the company or for our future. I'm really sorry. She didn't take it well. Are you serious? We've been planning this for so long and now you're cancelling at the last minute. I'll have to go alone. Do you know how embarrassing that'll be for me? Can't someone else take your place? Can people take care of Capricorn instead of Sky? I know how desperately you need them. Abigail, this deal's worth over $2 billion and I'm leading it. We've been working on it for the past year and no one else can step in for me. A lot of people's jobs depend on this deal going through. I know it's tough and I'll make it up to you with the bonus from the deal. I understand why you're upset, but there's nothing I can do. I'll be back Sunday. Both of them nodded and smiled, and the two men greeted one another briefly. She was furious. After that conversation, she stopped talking to me and told me to sleep in the guest room. No intimacy, no closeness, just coldness and anger. That wasn't like her at all. I tried to understand her frustration, but nothing I said could calm her down. Captain Firecracker FMDD. So, I packed for my trip and spent the night in the guest room. I knew how important this wedding was to Abigail. Her friend Margaret had been through a lot. Margaret's ex-husband had cheated on her while she was battling a serious illness. He left her because he couldn't handle her slow recovery. It devastated Margaret, but after a miraculous recovery, she filed for divorce and battled depression for the next 5 years. Her friends and family supported her through it all, but nothing seemed to lift her spirits. Then one day, she met a man at a grocery store, and just like that, her world brightened again. Her new fiancé, Brandon, adored her, and the wedding was a huge celebration of her comeback. Abigail had been by Margaret's side through everything, and now she was her maid of honor. I knew cancelling at the last minute hurt Abigail, but my hands were tied. I figured I'd just have to take the heat and make it up to her when I got back. The next morning, before leaving, I tried to give Abigail a goodbye kiss, but the bedroom door was locked. She didn't open it. I told her I loved her and promised to call from Italy when I landed. With a heavy heart, I walked out to the waiting limo, feeling terrible about the situation. After 19 years of marriage, I thought Abigail would understand the predicament, but it didn't seem like that was happening. I called her before my flight, but it went to voicemail. I left another apology, hoping she'd respond. I sent a text before takeoff and another after landing, but still nothing. I knew she was mad and I'd have to apologize a lot to get back in her good graces. With no other option, I called our twin daughters, Taylor and Sloane, who were away at college. I explained the situation and asked them to check on their mum and make sure she was okay. They understood and reassured me they'd keep an eye on her. They've always been Daddy's girls, and I've cherished that bond. When I arrived in Italy, I checked into the hotel and got in touch with my CEO, only to hear some unexpected news. The meeting was cancelled. The CEO of the other company had a family emergency and they had to push things back. I immediately booked a direct flight back to Philadelphia International Airport, which was only about 30 minutes from the wedding reception. The reception was set for 7 p.m. and I figured I could make it by 9:01. I hoped showing up would make things right with Abigail. After landing, I grabbed a rental car and the GPS led me straight to the venue. I got there just after 9. The place was buzzing. Music, dancing, drinks. Everyone was having a great time. Some folks were clearly having a little too much fun. I felt relieved to finally be there, even after a long day of travel. So, I grabbed a double bourbon from the bar and started looking for Abigail. It took a while to spot her in the crowd of over 200 people. As I sipped my drink and scanned the room, Memories of our time together came flooding back. Abigail is 5 years older than me. When we met, she had just gone through a divorce. Her ex-husband, Dr. Edward Walker, had cheated on her with a nurse during his residency. That betrayal hit her hard, both emotionally and financially. She was working as a waitress at the time, trying to make ends meet. Despite everything she'd been through, I saw something special in her. I saw a hard woman. We've been married for 19 years and we've raised our twin daughters, Taylor and Sloane, with so much love. We've built a life together, and Abigail always appreciated how straightforward and loyal I've been in our relationship. We often talked about how important loyalty is, and I admired her for leaving her cheating ex. That resilience was something I deeply respected. Our marriage had been built on trust and commitment, and I thought it was rock solid. Then I spotted Abigail. She was sitting with Edward, her ex-husband. I knew he was friends with Margaret, but I hadn't expected him to be here, especially not without his wife. It took me by surprise. Feeling drained from all the travel, I stood back for a moment, watching them. They looked pretty friendly, considering their history. Before I could move closer, Abigail stood up, took his hand, and led him to the dance floor. She looked incredible in her ivory dress, and for a brief moment, I hoped this was just an innocent dance. At first, I thought it was just an innocent dance, but as they glided through several slow songs, I couldn't shake this growing uneasiness. Abigail had been drinking. I could tell by her flirty behavior. Normally, a few drinks made her more affectionate and playful with me. Seeing her like that with someone else, especially her ex, was unsettling. Then came the moment that shattered me. She kissed him, right there, in front of everyone. I froze, feeling humiliated and furious all at once. Watching Abigail share intimate moments with Edward, seeing him touch her inappropriately and then exchange kisses, left me in utter shock and anger. I clenched my fists, ready to step in and stop it, but before I could, they moved back to the table off to the side.
Where are you?
That's when I saw them kissing, like they were on their honeymoon. His hands were all over her, and her hand disappeared under the table. I was ready to confront them, but then a harsh reality hit me. My marriage was done for. I remembered what my dad always said. Respect yourself, son. Don't put up with being treated badly. So I decided to act, but I kept my cool. Sure, I could have caused a scene, ruined the perfect wedding, and stopped them right then and there. But as I stood there, I thought, if she's into him, she can have him. She's not mine anymore. Feeling strangely calm, I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, and snapped a bunch of close-up pictures and a short video. Then I texted her. Guess what, sweetheart? My meeting got pushed and I'm back early. Seems like you're in good hands tonight. I'll head back home, guessing you'll be staying the night with Dr. Edward Walker. Now I get why you've been ignoring my calls and texts. Have a blast, and cheers to our marriage ending. I'll be gone by the time you come back tomorrow. I hit send and watched her, curious to see her reaction. Sure enough, her phone lit up. She picked it up, looked down, and started pressing buttons, clearly checking the text. As its battery died, the last stone fell and the phone fell to the ground, falling back a little ways into the jungle before sprouting again. Abigail sobered up fast. Her face went from carefree to serious in an instant. As soon as I noticed her reaction, I turned around and left the party. I made it to my car, and just as I was about to get in, I heard her yelling, "Michael, please wait." That I just gave her a cold look, shook my head, and got in. Before she could catch up, I drove off. My phone started blowing up with calls, but I was too upset to even think about picking up. If she wanted to go back to her ex, that was fine by me. After seeing them together like that, we were done. It had been 22 years since she'd left him, and now, at the first opportunity, she runs back to him. She's got some explaining to do to our family and the kids, because this mess is on her. The texts kept rolling in. "Michael, please come back. I need to explain. I love you. Please come back." And then, "Damn it, Michael, it's not what you think. I love you." But after 2 days of long flights, being ignored by her and then seeing her with Edward, I was done. I didn't care to hear her excuses. After ignoring 20 calls and texts, I finally stopped and sent one text back. Forget you. I'm doing great with my job. My kids are off to college and everything's paid for. I'm free to do as I please. I've still got enough youth left to start over. I drove for about 4 hours of my 7-hour trip back to Louisville and decided to stop at a diner to grab a meal and take a quick nap in the car before finishing the drive. While enjoying my eggs and bacon, I thought about everything that had happened. Back then, Facebook was the go-to platform for sharing life updates. Between bites, I pulled out my phone, changed my status from happily married to single and available, and uploaded 2 photos I'd taken at the wedding. The first photo showed Abigail and Edward sharing a passionate kiss. In the second, his hand was clearly on her chest. Beneath the pictures, I wrote, "Abigail claims she loves Benito," and "Abigail claims she loves Benito." The second photo showed Abigail is upgrading and reuniting with her ex-husband. Meanwhile, I'm back on the dating scene. It might have been immature, but it was the truth. I was moving forward without her. The funny thing? Edward was nearly 50, balding, overweight, and honestly not an upgrade in any way. It baffled me why she would throw away everything we'd built for a man who'd already cheated on her 20 years ago. Maybe she preferred a doctor over an accountant. Honestly, it hurt. It hurt more than I could put into words. I was sad, angry, and in a twisted way, kind of amused. She was ending a 19-year marriage for someone who'd betrayed her before. Forget her, forget him. They were perfect for each other. Some people might say it was just a kiss and some touching. That's not worth ending a marriage over, but in my book, either my woman is committed to me or she's free to be with someone else. After my late breakfast and a 2-hour nap in the car, I hit the road again and pulled into my driveway at 7 a.m. When I turned my phone back on, it started blowing up with notifications. Calls, texts, you name it. Messages from Abigail, her parents, her sister, and even her friends flooded in. Within 5 minutes, the phone started ringing again. It was Abigail. I wondered if she'd gotten any sleep or if she'd spent the night with Edward. Either way, it didn't matter. I ignored the call. I was past all of that now. I focused on one thing, getting what I needed out of the house and moving on. Her family always liked me, so when her dad James called that morning, I picked up. I explained everything to him.
Daddy.
"James," I said, "I had no idea she was unhappy with our marriage, but this was the breaking point. The disrespect she showed me in front of people we know is something I can't tolerate. It's clear she still has feelings for that man, so she can be with him. I plan to find a woman who will value what I bring to the table and remain faithful." The only option left was clear. I decided I'd move out today and put the house up for sale first thing tomorrow morning. Sullivan himself calls, asking where I might go. "I'll say no," he replies. "Please send Clearport no." I resolved to accept a resignation. I'd contact a lawyer to start the divorce process immediately. Abigail could stay in the house until it sold. I'd make sure everything was fair. Call me old-fashioned, but I refuse to live with someone who has their heart set on someone else. She made her choice, but I don't think it was a wise one. About an hour later, James, her dad, showed up, practically pleading with me to wait and talk to Abigail before making such a drastic decision. He asked me to hear her out, but I just shook my head and pointed to the photos again, showing how they openly fondled each other at the wedding. This was beyond disrespect, and I wouldn't stand for it. But Capricorn being the Capricorns, she moved right through the social fivers, and I followed. James looked both disappointed in her and unsettled by how fast I'd made up my mind, but I knew there was no going back. Walking into what used to be our home, I felt tears welling up. It hit me hard. Our once happy home was now just an empty shell of a broken marriage. Over the last 5 years, we had poured our time and energy into transforming this house into our dream home. Back then, mortgage rates were under 2.99%, and the house's value had doubled. Being the numbers guy, I refinanced it to its full value, pulling out nearly $500,000 in equity. I used $200,000 of that to set up trust funds for Taylor and Sloane's college educations, with a little extra to help them kickstart their adult lives. The remaining $100,000 went into upgrading the house, making it a place we both loved. Thanks to the lower interest rate, our monthly payments only increased by $700. Abigail even went back to work as a receptionist to help cover the difference. My salary was decent, nothing extravagant, but as the newly promoted CFO, I was set to receive stock options the following year. Those options were our ticket to a secure retirement. I'd explained it to Abigail a few times, but she never showed much interest. As long as her needs were met, she trusted my financial decisions and enjoyed a comfortable life. The future had seemed bright. With the merger, I was on track for a bonus of about 400. Zero stock options. If everything went as planned, those shares were projected to hit $100 each, giving us a fortune down the line. But since the merger was delayed, those options wouldn't be part of the divorce settlement. I planned to file for irreconcilable differences and split our assets evenly. We had about $50,000 in savings, and once the house sold, we'd divide the remaining proceeds. But with the mortgage as high as it was, there wouldn't be much left. Abigail, at 44, would walk away with her car and roughly $25,000. If she had stayed faithful, she could have had a loving life and a secure future. Instead, my anger and humiliation had eclipsed any affection I once felt for her. All I wanted now was closure, and for her to understand the magnitude of what she'd thrown away. Exoplanet mode, authoritarian mode. Rejection mode, exoplanet mode, authoritarian mode. The prison system, when the time came for me to defend myself, began by self-defense. Seeing Edward again after 20 years had brought back a flood of memories. He used to be her husband, and they'd had a good relationship, until he cheated on her, which ended their marriage. From everything Abigail told me, Edward had never been as special to her as I was. She'd told me many times how much she loved me, her current husband, the one she called a wonderful partner. I was more attractive than Edward, more stable, and someone she could rely on. Yet somehow, she let herself fall back into his arms, letting him kiss her, hold her, knowing it was wrong. She told herself it was harmless. A little flirting, a little closeness. It didn't mean anything, right? But it did. She drank too much, got emotional because I wasn't there with her, and crossed a line she knew she shouldn't. And when Edward kissed her again, she felt happy. For a moment, his kiss reminded her of the old days. She let herself believe it was okay, just a little fun at a wedding. She figured she could smooth things over with me later. Then came my text. Her phone buzzed, and she assumed it was me checking in. When she opened the message and read it, she panicked. She realized I was there and that I'd seen everything. Abigail rushed to make an excuse to Edward, claiming she needed to use the restroom. Her heart pounded as she hurried out of the wedding, her high heels clacking against the floor. She saw the exit door swing shut and raced after me, calling my name, begging me to wait. As I headed out of the church, her husband called to me to stop. Abigail rushed to make an excuse to Edward, calling my name, begging me to wait. But I didn't stop. I climbed into my car, closed the door, and drove off, leaving her standing there in shock. She tried to call me, but I ignored every single one. Text after text poured in. Finally, she got a response. "Fortuith," she said on the first text. "Forget you." Later that night, her friends found her outside, kneeling in the cold, trying to make sense of what had just happened. They were shocked by what she'd done and worried about what it would mean for our marriage. They knew me well enough to understand that I wouldn't let this go. The next morning, back in Louisville, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping one last cup of coffee in the home we'd built together. As I finished, I felt a mix of sadness and anger. Not long afterwards, the telephone bells in the kitchen began to ring. The phone rang. I rinsed out the empty mug, set it in the sink, and wrote Abigail a brief note. In it, I told her not to call me. We'd talk once the divorce papers were ready. I didn't even sign it. As a final gesture, I left my wedding ring on top of the note, grabbed my bags, and walked out the door for the last time. So, this is a membership website that was created using the fabrication tools built in by Framespace, and once I got to my laptop, I split our funds and cancelled our joint accounts. I cleared the balance on the credit card and cancelled it. From that moment on, Abigail would be responsible for herself. If she wanted to contest the divorce, she'd have to manage the mortgage and all the bills on her own. Without my financial support, there was no way she could handle it. Still, I knew the house would sell quickly if priced right. It was in high demand. If she agreed to the divorce, we could end this failed marriage swiftly and she could go back to her beloved Edward. I drove away from what had once been my sanctuary, heading into an unfamiliar and lonely new chapter of my life. Later, I heard through mutual friends at the wedding that Abigail had completely fallen apart after I left. She couldn't stop crying and eventually drank herself into exhaustion, passing out from the combination of alcohol and tears. Her friends were concerned, calling and texting me repeatedly, asking me to come back and stop her from ruining the reception. They eventually took her back to her hotel room, put her to bed, and checked on her throughout the night. The next morning, reality hit her like a freight train. She woke up, hungover and devastated, fully aware of what had happened. She immediately started calling me, begging for forgiveness, pleading with me to answer. But after seeing her actions, I wanted nothing to do with her. Every call and text from her felt like an insult, a reminder of her betrayal. And Sunday morning, I woke up with a heavy heart, a pounding headache, and the weight of the divorce looming over me. I flew home at noon, and my dad picked me up from the airport. Apparently, Michael had called him earlier to explain he couldn't pick me up himself. When my dad saw me, he took one look and knew I was a wreck. My dad has always been my rock, and when I saw him, I broke down, running into his arms. "Daddy, I messed up," I sobbed. "I think Michael's gone for good." He hugged me gently, his voice full of quiet sorrow. "I talked to him this morning. It doesn't look good, sweetheart." He sighed deeply. "You know, Michael, what were you thinking? And with Edward?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know, Dad. I was drunk and mad at Michael for not coming to the wedding. I know I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. I didn't even sleep with him." He sighed again, his disappointment clear. "From the pictures I saw, it might as well have been the same thing. You know, Michael, he doesn't forgive betrayal easily. And to him, being with another man like that is betrayal." When I got home, I hoped against hope that Michael might be there, waiting to talk. Deep down, I knew better. The house was empty, his things gone. My heart broke all over again when I saw his wedding ring sitting on the table next to a short, unsigned note. Meanwhile, Michael had relocated to the company condo meant for visiting clients. Since it wasn't booked, his CEO had approved his stay there. His boss, Bill, had gone through a similar situation years ago and offered some advice. Postpone receiving the year's stock options for better leverage in the divorce. By Monday morning, Michael was back in his office on the 16th floor, knowing Abigail wouldn't be able to get past security. He'd already informed the team that if she showed up, they were to politely escort her out. Sure enough, she tried, only to realize she couldn't reach him at work either. With no way to contact him and no idea where he was staying, Abigail was left in the dark, isolated, regretful and terrified of what lay ahead. All she could do was sit with the consequences of her choices. Friends and family started calling, wanting to know what had happened. But something else happened too. Suddenly, I found myself very popular with women. After the divorce, I found myself entering a whole new world. I started going out with women younger than me, full of energy and enthusiasm, qualities I hadn't experienced in a long time. The constant negativity and complaints from Abigail were replaced by exciting dates, playful text messages, and genuine attention from women who were simply looking to enjoy life. About a month after I made that Facebook post, I met Julia. She was vibrant, kind, and full of life. We hit it off right away, and before long, we became a couple. Shortly after my divorce with Abigail was finalized, Julia and I officially started our journey together, a fresh chapter I never saw coming. When Abigail learned about my new life, she wasn't happy. She was mostly upset with herself. But there was jealousy too. She was hurt that I didn't give her a second chance before moving on. I refused all her attempts to meet up, communicating only through our lawyers. Eventually, we sold the house. After paying the real estate agent and other costs, there wasn't much left, just under $11,000 in equity. I decided Abigail should have that small amount. Her lawyers tried to argue for a share of my future earnings, but the court ruled that settlements couldn't be based on potential income. Instead, they used my average income to calculate what I owed. Since Abigail had a job, paying alimony wasn't too burdensome. I agreed to give her $2,000 a month for 2 years, enough to help her get back on her feet or find someone else. That person, however, was never going to be me. In the years that followed, Abigail and I only communicated through our lawyers. She eventually moved to Milwaukee, joined a support group, and started living with Edward. Although they grew close, she wasn't the same happy, confident person she had been with me. She came to understand, too late, the cost of her actions. In her anger and selfishness, she had made a choice that disregarded everything we had built. 3 years later, at her daughter's graduation, Abigail and I crossed paths again. By then, I had remarried and Julia was by my side, pregnant with our second child. Our 1-year-old daughter, Eva, clung to Julia as she proudly held her in her arms. Abigail, now 47, looked much older. Edward, sensing the tension, stayed in the background. However, the gratitude which followed Albert's removal. Later, Abigail managed to catch me alone. She wanted to apologize. She admitted how deeply she regretted her choices and mourned the life we could have shared. Her voice trembled as she acknowledged the mistake of risking everything for nothing. Get him, I persisted. The scribes who wrote the happiness program, there are 100 who might be able to corrupt me. No, she said, I have looked into the matter and I told her I had forgiven her. As much as her betrayal had hurt, I thanked her for the good times we had, for our 2 beautiful daughters, and for the love we once shared. I explained how her actions, though painful, had ultimately led me to Julia and a new chapter filled with joy. I described the moments when I realized something is lacking. My children, like my wife and daughters, were not necessary parts of my universe. I could not relate. For hours upon hours, we went through this painful chapter. I advised Abigail to focus on her future and assured her that our past was behind us. I wished her well and expressed hope that we could see each other peacefully at family events. At that moment, Julia joined us, holding Eva. I introduced them and the stark difference between them was clear. Julia, at 28, radiated youth and warmth, while Abigail looked every bit her age, her regrets etched into her face. She could have been mistaken for Julia's mother. The realization deepened her sorrow. She dismissed the first apparition and went to find her younger sister. The love of her life, gone because of one night of anger and poor choices. Over the following decade, our paths crossed occasionally at our daughters' weddings and other milestones. Abigail never remarried, but continued her life with Edward, who treated her kindly. Still, whenever she saw me with Julia and our young daughters, it brought back memories of the happiness we once shared. Those memories were all she had left, a reminder of what she had lost. In a twist of fate, the old family home came back on the market. That summer, after catching in my stock options, I bought it back. My family and friends were thrilled, especially my daughters, who loved revisiting the place where so many of their childhood memories were made. Abigail wasn't part of this new chapter, but the life I'm building now with Julia and our daughters is everything I could have hoped for. It's a fresh start, full of love and new memories. If there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's this. Before you decide to wrong someone, make sure you'll never need them again. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd love to hear your thoughts about these events in the comments below. Take care, everyone.